Sometimes the ones who have the least are the ones who give the most. This thought crossed Lily's mind as she huddled beneath a thin blanket in the abandoned storefront that had become her shelter. Outside, Chicago's winter howled, blanketing the streets with snow that glittered under streetlights like fallen stars. At 8 years old, Lily had learned to survive on the streets in ways no child should. She couldn't remember much before waking up in a hospital 2 years ago. The doctors had explained that she'd been in a terrible car accident. Her parents hadn't survived, and the trauma had taken chunks of her memory. With no known relatives and an overwhelmed foster care system, Lily had eventually slipped through the cracks, becoming one of the city's invisible children. Tonight was different, though. The temperature had plummeted to dangerous levels, and the snowstorm was the worst of the season. Even in her makeshift home with layers of cardboard insulation, Lily shivered uncontrollably. When the howling wind briefly subsided, she heard something outside. A thud, followed by silence. Curiosity overcame fear as she peeked through the frost-covered window. A dark shape lay motionless in the snow about 50 feet from her shelter. "Hello?" Lily called, her voice small against the vastness of the storm. No response came. Common sense told her to stay inside where it was safer, warmer. But something else, something her heart remembered even if her mind couldn't, pushed her to help. Wrapping her blanket tightly around her shoulders, she stepped into the biting cold. The snow came up to her knees as she struggled toward the figure. It was a man in an expensive-looking coat, face down in the snow. His briefcase had spilled open, papers swirling away in the wind. "Mister?" Lily shook his shoulder, her small hand nearly disappearing against his large frame. "Mister, you can't sleep here, you'll freeze." The man didn't stir. Panic bubbled in Lily's chest. She'd seen what happened to people who fell asleep in the cold. Summoning all her strength, she turned him over onto his back. His face was pale, lips tinged blue, but she could see small puffs of breath escaping his mouth. He was alive, but barely. Lily knew her tiny shelter wouldn't be enough. Looking around desperately, she spotted a light in a building across the street, a 24-hour diner she'd sometimes visited when kind workers would give her leftover food. "I'll get help," she promised the unconscious man, though she doubted he could hear her. "Don't go away." She ran as fast as her legs could carry her through the deep snow, bursting into the warm diner with such force that the few late-night patrons turned in surprise. "Please help," she gasped. "There's a man outside in the snow, he won't wake up." The diner's cook, a burly man named Joe who had slipped Lily pancakes on more than one occasion, immediately grabbed his coat. "Where, child?" As they rushed back to the man, joined by a waitress and another customer, Lily prayed they weren't too late. Joe checked the man's pulse while the waitress called 911. "He's alive," Joe confirmed. "But we need to warm him up now." Together, they carried the man to the diner, laying him near the heater and covering him with blankets. As color gradually returned to his face, Lily noticed something strange. A small scar near his right eyebrow, shaped like a crescent moon. The same scar she saw every time she looked at her own reflection. While they waited for the ambulance, the man's eyes fluttered open, revealing deep blue irises, just like hers. For a brief moment, their gazes locked and something like recognition flickered across his face before his eyes closed again. The paramedics arrived minutes later, efficiently transferring the man onto a stretcher. As they prepared to leave, one of them turned to Joe. "Does anyone know who he is?" Joe shook his head, but the waitress gasped, pointing to a business card that had fallen from the man's pocket. "That's Alexander Wellington," she whispered. "The Alexander Wellington. He owns half the buildings downtown." As the ambulance doors closed, Lily stood still, watching the flashing lights disappear into the storm. The name echoed in her mind like a half-remembered lullaby. Wellington. Why did it sound so familiar? What she didn't notice was the man's briefcase still lying in the snow where he had fallen, or the photograph that had spilled out, a picture of a younger Alexander Wellington standing beside a woman who looked remarkably like Lily, both of them holding a baby girl. Nor did she notice the black car that had silently pulled up across the street, or the woman watching intently from behind tinted windows, a woman who had been searching for both Alexander Wellington and a missing child for 2 long years, for very different reasons. Morning came with hesitant sunlight filtering through the clouds, illuminating a city transformed by snow. Lily sat in a plastic chair at Mercy Hospital, her small feet dangling above the floor. Joe from the diner had insisted on bringing her along when he'd come to check on the man they'd rescued. "You saved his life," Joe had told her. "He might want to thank you." Now, as nurses bustled around and important-looking doctors consulted charts, Lily felt out of place. Her faded coat and tangled hair stood in stark contrast to the pristine hospital environment. She hadn't wanted to come. Hospitals held fragments of painful memories, but the image of the man's face with that familiar crescent scar had haunted her through the night. "Miss?" A nurse with kind eyes approached. "Are you the little girl who found Mr. Wellington?" Lily nodded timidly. "He's awake now. Would you like to see him?" Following the nurse down the corridor, Lily's heart hammered in her chest. Something about this man felt important, like a puzzle piece she couldn't quite place. When they entered the private room, Alexander Wellington was sitting up in bed, his complexion still pale, but his eyes, those same blue eyes, alert and questioning. "This is the young lady who found you, Mr. Wellington," the nurse explained, before leaving them alone. For a long moment, Alexander just stared at Lily, his expression unreadable. Then, his voice barely audible, he asked, "What's your name?" "Lily," she answered. "Just Lily. I don't remember my last name." Alexander's hands trembled slightly as he reached for a glass of water. "How old are you, Lily?" 8, I think. The doctors said I might be 8 or 9. "Doctors?" His eyebrows furrowed. "Are you sick?" Lily shook her head, her gaze dropping to the floor. "There was an accident a long time ago. I don't remember it, but my parents died. The doctor said my head got hurt, and that's why I can't remember things from before." Alexander's breath caught audibly. "And now? Where do you live? Who takes care of you?" "Nobody," Lily admitted. "I was in a foster home for a while, but it wasn't nice there. So I left." "You've been living on the streets?" Alexander's voice rose with disbelief. "How long?" Lily shrugged. "A few months, maybe? It's not so bad. Joe at the diner gives me food sometimes." Alexander fell silent, his face a battlefield of emotions. Finally, he reached for his phone on the bedside table. "I need to make a call. But please don't leave, Lily, please." Something in his tone made Lily nod in agreement. As Alexander dialed, she wandered to the window, watching snowplows clear the streets below. "Margaret? It's me." Alexander spoke urgently into the phone. "I need you to bring something to Mercy Hospital immediately. The photograph from my desk, the one with Sarah and—" He glanced at Lily. "Just bring it. And contact Detective Rivera. Tell him I may have found her." Across town, in a spacious penthouse office, Margaret Chen hung up the phone, her hand trembling. For 2 years, she had watched her boss and friend become consumed by guilt and grief, searching tirelessly for his missing niece while battling his sister's former in-laws for custody rights. The accident that had killed Sarah and James Turner had only been the beginning of a nightmare that had nearly destroyed Alexander. Could it really be her? Margaret whispered to herself as she opened Alexander's desk drawer and retrieved the silver-framed photograph of Sarah Wellington Turner holding her daughter, Lillian, with Alexander standing proudly beside them. The child had just vanished from the hospital after the accident, a devastating blow atop the tragedy. Meanwhile, in a sleek black car parked outside the hospital, Victoria Blackwood tapped her manicured fingernails against the leather steering wheel. As the senior partner at Blackwood and Turner Law Firm, she had devoted the past 2 years to helping her cousin Gerald Turner, James's father, secure his late son's business assets. Alexander Wellington's interference had been a constant thorn in her side, especially his insistence that finding his niece took precedence over settling the estate. "He found her," Victoria murmured, watching the hospital entrance through designer sunglasses. Her informant inside the hospital had called immediately after hearing about the Wellington heir being admitted and about the street child who had saved him. This complicates everything. Back in the hospital room, Lily had discovered a deck of playing cards in the bedside drawer and was building an elaborate house of cards on Alexander's tray table. her small fingers working with surprising dexterity. "You're good at that," Alexander observed, watching her with intensity that might have made Lily uncomfortable if it didn't somehow feel familiar. "I practice a lot," she replied. "There's not much else to do sometimes." A knock at the door made them both look up. Margaret Chen entered, clutching a silver frame and a file folder. When her eyes fell on Lily, the frame nearly slipped from her grasp. "My God," she breathed. "It's her." Alexander held out his hand for the photograph. When he turned it to show Lily, the card structure she'd built collapsed as her hands began to tremble. "That's," she began, her voice faltering. "That's me? And who are those people?" "The woman is Sarah Turner, my sister," Alexander explained gently. "And the man beside us is James Turner, her husband. They're your parents, Lily. Your full name is Lillian Sarah Turner." Lily traced her finger over her mother's face. "I don't remember them." "The accident affected your memory," Alexander said. "But you remembered enough to survive. You're incredibly brave, Lily." "If you're my uncle," Lily asked, her young mind processing this revelation, "why didn't you find me before?" Pain flashed across Alexander's face. "We tried. We've been searching for 2 years. The hospital said you were taken by social services, but when we contacted them, they had no record of you. It was as if you'd vanished." Before Lily could respond, the door burst open again. A stern-looking woman in an expensive suit stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 men in dark coats. "Alexander," she said coldly, "I see the rumors are true." "Victoria," Alexander acknowledged, his voice hardening. "What are you doing here?" Victoria Blackwood's gaze shifted to Lily, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm here on behalf of Gerald Turner. If this child is indeed Lillian Turner, her grandfather has legal custody rights that supersede yours." "That case is still pending," Margaret interjected. "No court has granted Gerald custody." "Perhaps not," Victoria agreed smoothly. "But Gerald is the child's only blood relative on her father's side. And given Mr. Wellington's condition, and the fact that the child has clearly been neglected, we'll be filing for emergency custody immediately." Alexander started to rise from his bed, but one of the men stepped forward. "I'm Thomas Blake from Child Protective Services. If this is Lillian Turner, I'm afraid I'll need to take her into state custody until the court resolves this matter." Lily, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly slid off her chair and backed toward the window. In her 8 years of life, she had learned to recognize threats, and something about the way Victoria looked at her sent warning signals blaring through her mind. "I don't want to go with them," she whispered to Alexander. "Please don't make me go." The desperate plea in her voice made Alexander reach for her hand, but Thomas Blake was already approaching with an official-looking document. What none of them noticed was the hospital bracelet on Lily's wrist, placed there by a nurse who had recognized the symptoms of malnutrition and exposure. Nor did they see the doctor standing just outside the door, holding test results that would reveal something about Lily's condition that would change everything. Dr. Elena Ramirez had seen many cases of neglect in her 15 years as a pediatrician, but something about the little girl from the streets tugged at her heart. The test results in her hand confirmed her suspicions. Lily was severely malnourished, with early signs of frostbite on 2 toes, and an untreated respiratory infection. But there was something else. Something that made Dr. Ramirez pause outside Alexander Wellington's hospital room as voices rose inside. "You have no right to take her," Alexander was saying, his voice strained with emotion and fatigue. "Gerald Turner showed no interest in finding Lily for 2 years. Why the sudden concern now?" Victoria Blackwood's sharp reply cut through the air. "Mr. Turner was devastated by his son's death. Learning that his granddaughter might have survived has given him new purpose. And let's be frank, Alexander, the trust fund established for Lillian amounts to nearly $30 million. Someone needs to ensure those assets are properly managed." Dr. Ramirez knocked firmly, ending the heated exchange. All eyes turned to her as she entered, her white coat a stark contrast to the tension-filled room. "I'm Dr. Ramirez, Lily's attending physician," she announced, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And I need to speak with Mr. Wellington privately about Lily's condition." Thomas Blake from Child Protective Services stepped forward. As a representative of the state, this is a medical matter, Dr. Ramirez interrupted, her eyes unyielding. Doctor-patient confidentiality applies. I'll discuss my findings with the appropriate authorities after speaking with Mr. Wellington, who is currently listed as Lily's next of kin in our records. Victoria opened her mouth to protest, but Dr. Ramirez had already moved to Lily's side, gently taking her hand. Lily, would you mind waiting with Nurse Jackson for a few minutes? She has some hot chocolate for you at the nurse's station. Looking relieved to escape the conflict, Lily nodded and followed the nurse who had appeared in the doorway. Once she was gone, Dr. Ramirez turned to Victoria and Thomas. I need the room, please. Hospital policy. When they had reluctantly departed, with Victoria promising to return with a court order if necessary, Dr. Ramirez closed the door and turned to Alexander and Margaret. Mr. Wellington, I've reviewed Lily's test results. Her condition requires immediate attention, but it's not what concerns me most. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. The hospital records from 2 years ago, after the accident, I've requested them. There are inconsistencies. Alexander leaned forward. What kind of inconsistencies? According to those records, Lillian Turner was transferred to Greenwood Children's Hospital for specialized treatment of a traumatic brain injury. But when I contacted Greenwood, they have no record of ever admitting her. Margaret gasped. That's impossible. You were told what someone wanted you to believe, Dr. Ramirez said quietly. I've also had our lab run a preliminary DNA comparison using a sample from you, Mr. Wellington, which you provided when admitted. It strongly suggests you are indeed Lily's uncle. Alexander closed his eyes briefly, overwhelmed by confirmation of what his heart had already known. Someone took her from the hospital and ensured she would disappear into the system. That would require considerable influence, Margaret observed, her legal mind racing. Access to records, officials willing to look the other way, or a law firm with connections throughout the city. Alexander finished, his expression darkening. The same firm that's represented Gerald Turner in his attempts to control James's estate. Dr. Ramirez cleared her throat. There's something else. Lily's brain scans show no evidence of the severe traumatic injury described in her original records. She had a concussion, yes, but nothing that would cause the kind of memory loss she's experiencing. Are you saying her memory loss isn't physical? Margaret asked. I believe it's psychogenic, a response to extreme emotional trauma. She witnessed her parents' deaths, Mr. Wellington. Sometimes the mind protects itself by forgetting. Alexander's fists clenched on the bedsheets. Victoria and Gerald are behind this. They needed Lily out of the way to control the estate. That's a serious accusation, Dr. Ramirez cautioned. Without proof. I'll find proof, Alexander vowed. But first, I need to keep Lily safe. At the nurse's station, Lily sat with her small hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate, observing the bustling hospital corridor. 2 years of street survival had taught her to read people, to sense danger, and to identify exits. Right now, all her instincts were screaming that the woman in the expensive suit meant trouble. Her gaze drifted to the elevator bank, where Victoria Blackwood stood speaking in hushed tones on her phone. Though too far away to hear the conversation, Lily could read the anger in the woman's rigid posture and sharp gestures. Is that lady mad at my uncle? Lily asked Nurse Jackson, who was organizing medication charts nearby. The nurse followed her gaze and frowned slightly. That's grown-up business, honey. Nothing for you to worry about. But Lily did worry. In her fragmented memories, she sometimes glimpsed a face twisted with rage, a raised hand, the sound of shattering glass. She couldn't place these memories. They felt like scenes from a nightmare, but the emotions they evoked were terrifyingly real. She wants to take me away, Lily whispered, more to herself than to the nurse. Before Nurse Jackson could respond, a commotion erupted at the end of the corridor. A tall, elderly man with a silver cane was arguing with hospital security, his imperious voice carrying down the hallway. I demand to see her. That's my granddaughter. Victoria rushed to intercept him. Gerald, I told you to wait. We're handling this legally. I've waited 2 years, Gerald Turner roared. 2 years believing she was dead while he kept searching. He jabbed his cane toward Alexander's room. "I won't wait another minute." As hospital security attempted to calm the situation, Lily slid off her chair, her instincts for self-preservation taking over. With the attention focused on the disturbance, no one noticed as she slipped away, ducking into a linen closet at the first sign of pursuit. Through the slightly ajar door, she watched as Victoria and Gerald were escorted to a waiting area, their protests fading as they disappeared around a corner. Seizing the opportunity, Lily darted back toward Alexander's room only to collide with Dr. Ramirez in the hallway. "Lily?" The doctor steadied her. "Where were you going?" "That man," Lily gasped. "He says he's my grandfather, but I don't want to go with him." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He scares me." Something in her words made Dr. Ramirez kneel to eye level. "Lily, do you remember him? Have you seen him before?" Lily hesitated, her brow furrowing with concentration. "I don't know. His voice sounds familiar. When I heard him yell, I felt—" She wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture of instinctive protection. Dr. Ramirez exchanged a significant look with Margaret, who had joined them in the hallway. "Lily, sometimes our bodies remember things even when our minds can't. That feeling might be important." Before Lily could respond, a commotion erupted from Alexander's room. They rushed inside to find him attempting to get out of bed, his face pale with exertion. "Alexander, you can't—" Margaret began. "I have to," he insisted. "Detective Rivera is on his way, but we can't wait. If Gerald is here in person, he's desperate. And desperate people make mistakes." A soft ping from Margaret's phone interrupted them. When she checked the screen, her eyes widened. "It's from Rivera. He found something in the Turner Company records. Financial transfers to Blackwood and Turner law firm marked as special handling fees, dated 3 days after the accident." Alexander's expression hardened. "Special handling? Is that what they call kidnapping and abandonment these days?" From the doorway, a cold voice responded. "I call it protecting family interests from opportunists." They turned to find Victoria Blackwood standing there, Gerald Turner at her side, flanked by Thomas Blake and a woman in a sheriff's uniform holding an official document. "This is a court order granting temporary custody of Lillian Turner to her grandfather," Victoria announced triumphantly. "You've lost Alexander again." But what no one had noticed was the small device that had fallen from Gerald's coat pocket when he'd pounded his cane earlier. A voice recorder that was still running, capturing his unguarded conversation with Victoria in the waiting room. A recorder that now lay hidden beneath the chair where Lily had been sitting, waiting to reveal secrets that could change everything. The hospital conference room felt too small for the tension it contained. Alexander Wellington sat in a wheelchair, his face ashen but determined, directly across from Gerald Turner, whose weathered face remained impassive behind steel-rimmed glasses. Victoria Blackwood stood by the window, the winter sunlight illuminating her perfectly tailored suit. Detective Michael Rivera, a stocky man with thoughtful eyes, observed from a corner while Thomas Blake arranged papers on the table. Lily, however, was conspicuously absent, having been taken to the children's ward under Dr. Ramirez's care while the adults decided her fate. "This meeting is a courtesy," Victoria began, her voice carrying the practiced authority of a senior attorney. "The court order is clear. Gerald Turner has been granted temporary custody of his granddaughter while a full hearing is arranged." Alexander's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Daniela Ortiz, who had arrived 30 minutes earlier, adjusted her glasses. "My client contests the validity of this order, which was obtained without full disclosure of pertinent facts." "Such as?" Victoria challenged. "Such as the suspicious circumstances surrounding Lillian Turner's disappearance from medical care," Daniela replied evenly, "and Mr. Turner's conspicuous lack of interest in locating her for 2 years. Gerald Turner slammed his cane against the floor. "How dare you? I was told by authorities, by your people," he jabbed a finger toward Alexander, "that she had died from her injuries." Detective Rivera cleared his throat. "That's actually why I'm here, Mr. Turner. No official report ever declared Lillian Turner deceased. In fact, according to hospital records pulled this morning, she was transferred to Greenwood Children's Hospital for specialized care following the accident." "Exactly," Victoria interjected. "And then she vanished." We've always maintained that Mr. Wellington's influence. Greenwood has no record of ever admitting her, Detective Rivera continued, his voice cutting through Victoria's accusation. I find that curious, don't you, Ms. Blackwood? Almost as curious as the series of payments from Turner Enterprises to your law firm in the days following the accident. Payments marked as special handling fees. The color drained from Victoria's face, but she recovered quickly. We handled numerous aspects of the aftermath of James and Sarah Turner's deaths. Those payments covered legitimate legal services. Alexander leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Gerald's face. Where is the money, Gerald? That's what this has always been about, hasn't it? James and Sarah's money. Lily's inheritance. Gerald's expression hardened. You self-righteous hypocrite. You think I don't know what you and Sarah were planning? Cutting me out of my own company, my life's work, after I brought your precious sister into it? Sarah was trying to protect the company from your increasingly risky investments, Alexander countered. James agreed with her. They were planning to restructure, not cut you out. Gentlemen, Daniela interrupted, this isn't productive. What matters now is Lily's welfare. Thomas Blake nodded. As the child welfare representative, I'm concerned about the hostile environment this conflict creates. Perhaps a neutral third party should have temporary custody until... The door opened abruptly, and Margaret Chen entered, slightly breathless. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Dr. Ramirez needs to speak with all of you immediately. It's about Lily. A cold fear gripped Alexander as they followed Margaret to a small examination room where Dr. Ramirez waited, her expression grave. The doctor gestured to chairs arranged in a semicircle. Where's Lily? Alexander demanded. She's with our child psychologist, Dr. Ramirez assured him. But something has happened that changes the situation significantly. She placed a small digital recorder on the table between them. Lily found this in the corridor earlier. It belonged to Mr. Turner and was still recording. Victoria started to object, but Detective Rivera raised a hand. As part of an ongoing investigation, I've reviewed the content. I suggest everyone listen carefully. Dr. Ramirez pressed play. Static crackled briefly before Gerald Turner's voice emerged, sharp with irritation. This is taking too long, Victoria. I told you I wanted this handled quietly. Victoria's recorded voice replied, Keep your voice down. We're in a hospital, for God's sake, and this is being handled. The judge signed the order. After 2 years of failures, Gerald hissed. 2 years of paying your firm to keep that child buried in the system while you fought Wellington for control of the trust. Now she turns up like a bad penny, and you expect me to play the devoted grandfather? I've never even met the girl. You don't need to like her, Gerald, Victoria responded coldly. You just need to control her. Once you have custody, we can proceed with the conservatorship petition. With her documented mental health issues and memory problems, the court will grant it easily. And then the trust is mine to manage. Gerald completed the thought. Finally. But what about Wellington? He won't stop. Leave Alexander to me, Victoria assured him. I have friends at the prosecutor's office who would be very interested in some of his company's overseas dealings. A fraud investigation would keep him thoroughly distracted. The recording continued for another minute, detailing their plans to control Lily's inheritance and systematically discredit Alexander's efforts to protect her. When it ended, the silence in the room was deafening. Thomas Blake was the first to speak, his face flushed with anger. As a representative of Child Protective Services, I am immediately revoking the temporary custody order on the grounds of clear intent to exploit a minor. Gerald Turner struggled to his feet, pointing a trembling finger at the recorder. That's inadmissible. It was obtained illegally. Actually, Detective Rivera informed him, in this state, single-party consent is sufficient for recording conversations. Since the device is yours, Mr. Turner, you effectively consented to the recording. Victoria's composure finally cracked. This is absurd. We were discussing legal strategies, nothing more. Conspiring to file fraudulent documents and commit perjury hardly qualifies as legal strategy, Ms. Blackwood, Daniela observed dryly. Neither does abandoning an injured child to the streets to gain control of her trust fund. As Victoria and Gerald began arguing desperately with their rapidly collapsing legal position, Alexander turned to Dr. Ramirez. I need to see Lily. Now. The doctor led him to a cheerful room in the pediatric ward, where Lily sat with a gentle-faced woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Dr. Patterson, the hospital's lead child psychologist. Lily has been incredibly brave, Dr. Patterson explained quietly. We've been working with some guided meditation techniques to help her access her memories safely. Lily looked up as Alexander entered, her blue eyes, so like his sister's, wide with uncertainty. Did you listen to the recorder? Alexander nodded, moving to sit beside her. We did, sweetheart. You found something very important. They wanted to take me away because of money? Lily asked, her young face struggling to comprehend such callousness. Some people value the wrong things, Alexander replied, choosing his words carefully. But what matters now is that you're safe. No one is going to take you away. Lily studied his face, searching for reassurance. Dr. Patterson was helping me remember things. I remembered a little about my mom. She used to sing to me at night, a song about the moon and stars. Alexander's throat tightened with emotion. Yes, she did. Every night since you were born, she called you her little star. I remember her hands, Lily continued, her voice small but growing more confident. They were soft, and she wore a silver ring with a blue stone. Her sapphire, Alexander confirmed. It was our grandmother's. Sarah treasured it. What happens now? Lily asked, the practical survivor in her needing concrete answers. Before Alexander could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Dr. Ramirez rushed back into the room, her face tense. Mr. Wellington, Gerald Turner has collapsed. The paramedics think it might be a heart attack. Alexander hesitated, torn between centuries-old instincts of compassion and fresh wounds of betrayal. Lily watched him, her expression unreadable. You should go, she said finally. Even if he's bad, you're not. The simple wisdom of her words struck Alexander to his core. With a grateful nod to Lily, he followed Dr. Ramirez to where Gerald lay on the floor, surrounded by medical personnel. Victoria was nowhere to be seen. As the paramedics worked to stabilize Gerald, the elderly man's eyes fluttered open, locking onto Alexander's face. His lips moved, forming words too faint to hear. Alexander hesitated, then leaned closer. James knew, Gerald whispered, his voice barely audible. Before the accident, he found the offshore accounts, the missing funds. Alexander stiffened. What are you saying? Gerald's eyes filled with tears of pain, or perhaps regret. The brakes. It wasn't supposed to. Sarah wasn't supposed to be in the car. The words hung in the air like poison, as Gerald's eyes closed again, and the paramedics rushed him toward the emergency department. Alexander stood frozen, the horrific implication crashing over him like a tidal wave. What Gerald had just confessed went far beyond financial manipulation and custody battles. It struck at the very heart of the tragedy that had orphaned Lily and set this entire chain of events in motion. And somewhere in the hospital, Victoria Blackwood was gathering her belongings, preparing for a hasty departure with evidence that could prove exactly how deep this conspiracy truly went. Detective Michael Rivera had spent 20 years in law enforcement, believing that most cases weren't about good versus evil, but rather about people making poor choices in difficult situations. The Wellington Turner case was making him reconsider that philosophy. As he stood in Victoria Blackwood's abandoned office, surrounded by the remnants of hastily shredded documents, he felt a rare anger rising within him. This wasn't just corporate greed or legal maneuvering. This was calculated cruelty against a child. She took everything from the safe, Victoria's assistant told him, her voice shaking. I didn't know what she was doing. She just said it was a legal emergency and then left. Rivera nodded, his experienced eyes scanning the room for anything overlooked in Victoria's rushed departure. A faint glimmer caught his attention from beneath the heavy mahogany desk, a small silver flash drive that had fallen into the carpet's deep pile. Back at Mercy Hospital, Alexander sat beside Lily in the hospital cafeteria. Despite Dr. Ramirez's insistence that he should rest after his own ordeal, Alexander had refused to leave Lily's side. Gerald Turner had been stabilized but remained in intensive care, his legal situation complicated by his medical condition. Is it always this noisy? Lily asked, eyeing the crowd of hospital staff, patients, and visitors with the wariness of someone who had learned to avoid crowds. Sometimes, Alexander replied, watching her pick at a plate of chicken nuggets. How are you feeling about everything? Lily considered the question with a seriousness beyond her years. Dr. Patterson says I don't have to feel any special way about Mr. Turner just because he's my grandfather. She says what he did was wrong, even if he is family. Dr. Patterson is very wise. Alexander agreed. Did he really hurt my parents? Lily asked abruptly, her blue eyes piercing. Alexander hesitated. The police had taken Gerald's whispered confession seriously, but the investigation was only beginning. We don't know for certain yet. Detective Rivera is working to find the truth. I had a dream last night, Lily continued, setting down her fork. I was in a car, and my dad was driving. He looked worried, and he was talking on the phone to someone. He said, I found the records, and I'm bringing them to Alexander tonight. Then my mom told me we were going to see Uncle Alex and might stay with him for a while. She paused, her brow furrowing. After that, it gets scary and jumbled. Screeching sounds, mom screaming. Alexander reached across the table, gently taking her small hand in his. Those might be real memories coming back, Lily. It's okay if they're confusing or frightening. Dr. Patterson can help you understand them. Was my dad bringing you something important? I think he might have been, Alexander admitted. Something that could have proven that Gerald was doing something wrong at the company your parents and I built together. Before Lily could respond, Margaret Chen approached their table, her normally composed expression strained. Alexander, Detective Rivera just called. He found something at Victoria's office and is on his way here now. Alexander squeezed Lily's hand reassuringly. Let's finish lunch first. But their meal was interrupted by an announcement over the hospital PA system. Code Silver East Wing, Code Silver East Wing. Margaret's face paled. That's the active threat alert. Hospital security personnel suddenly appeared throughout the cafeteria, moving with controlled urgency. One approached their table directly. Mr. Wellington, we need to move you and the child to a secure location immediately, the guard said quietly. Please come with me. Alexander lifted Lily into his arms, ignoring the protest from his still recovering body. What's happening? Victoria Blackwood has been spotted in the hospital, the guard explained as he led them down a service corridor. She bypassed security at an employee entrance. Police are responding, but we're moving all potential targets to safe areas. In a locked administrative office deep within the hospital, Dr. Ramirez was already waiting with Detective Rivera, whose grim expression confirmed the seriousness of the situation. Victoria had an encrypted email account we found on this flash drive, Rivera explained, setting his laptop on the conference table. She's been communicating with someone named Executor for years. The messages discuss the Turner situation in detail, including explicit plans to ensure Lily was never found after the accident. It wasn't just about the money, Alexander realized, setting Lily down on a chair but keeping a protective hand on her shoulder. Gerald was covering up corporate fraud and James discovered it. That appears correct, Rivera confirmed. Based on emails between Victoria and Gerald, James Turner had uncovered evidence of embezzlement and tax evasion amounting to millions. He was bringing the evidence to you the night of the accident. The accident that wasn't an accident, Margaret murmured. Rivera nodded solemnly. We've issued an arrest warrant for Victoria on charges of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory after the fact in the deaths of James and Sarah Turner. Why would she come back to the hospital? Doctor, Ramirez asked, voicing the question everyone was thinking. It's irrational. Because Gerald talked, Alexander replied, his voice hardening. And because there's one loose end she still needs to tie up. He looked down at Lily, who was listening with solemn attention. Me? Lily said quietly. She wants to hurt me because I can remember things now. Alexander knelt beside her chair. I won't let that happen, Lily. I promise. None of us will, Dr. Ramirez added firmly. A soft knock at the door made everyone tense. Rivera drew his weapon and approached cautiously, signaling the others to stay back. After checking through the peephole, he relaxed slightly and opened the door to admit a young police officer. Detective, We've swept the east and north wings. No sign of Blackwood, the officer reported. But security says they're missing video from the sub-basement level where the mechanical systems are housed. Rivera holstered his weapon. She's trying to access the hospital through the maintenance tunnels. Smart. He turned to the others. I'm going to join the search team. Officer Chen will remain here with you. As Rivera departed, Alexander moved to the window, looking out at the swirling snow that had begun falling again. 2 years, he whispered. 2 years of searching while you were out there alone, Lily. I'm so sorry. It wasn't your fault, Lily replied, coming to stand beside him. And I wasn't always alone. There were people who helped sometimes. Alexander smiled down at her. Like Joe from the diner? Lily nodded. And Ms. Fran at the library who pretended not to notice me sleeping in the reading corner. And Mr. Chen who owns the convenience store. He gave me food that was expired but still good. When this is over, Alexander promised, we'll go thank each of them properly. The lights in the room suddenly flickered, then went out completely, plunging them into darkness. Emergency lighting activated seconds later, casting an eerie glow across concerned faces. The backup generators should have prevented that, Dr. Ramirez said, moving toward the phone on the wall. She lifted the receiver, then frowned. The line's dead. Officer Chen drew his weapon. Stay away from the doors and windows, he instructed, moving to secure the room's entrance. But the threat didn't come through the door. A ceiling panel directly above the conference table shifted slightly, then slid aside. Before anyone could react, a small metal canister dropped through the opening, hitting the table with a metallic clang, and immediately beginning to spew thick, white smoke. Gas! Margaret shouted, lunging to cover her face. In the confusion, a black-clad figure dropped through the ceiling opening, landing with cat-like grace on the conference table. Victoria Blackwood's once immaculate appearance had given way to a desperate efficiency. Her eyes, visible through a mask protecting her from the gas, found Lily immediately. Officer Chen raised his weapon, but the disorienting smoke and his need to protect civilians slowed his response. Victoria kicked out, catching him in the wrist and sending his gun spinning across the floor. As the room filled with the acrid smoke, Alexander pulled Lily behind him, backing toward the far corner. His eyes burned and his lungs seized, but his focus remained absolute. It's over, Victoria, he managed between coughs. The authorities know everything. Nothing's over until I say it is, Victoria snarled through her mask, advancing with predatory intent. Gerald may have lost his nerve, but I haven't lost mine. What Victoria failed to notice was Lily slipping away from Alexander's protection, moving with the quiet agility that had kept her alive on the streets. As the adult struggled against the effects of the smoke, Lily reached the fallen officer's weapon, her small hands wrapping around cold metal with a child's terrible resolve. The weight of the weapon in Lily's small hands felt wrong, a burden no child should bear. Through stinging tears and choking smoke, she saw Victoria advancing toward Alexander, who stood protectively where he thought Lily remained behind him. Lily, run! Alexander called out, unaware that she had already moved away. Victoria laughed, a harsh sound behind her mask. No one's running anywhere, Alexander. This ends now. In that moment, Lily made a decision that would later mark the true beginning of her healing. Instead of raising the weapon, she carefully placed it on the floor and slid it toward Dr. Ramirez, who had maintained her composure better than the others. Dr. Ramirez, Lily called, her voice cutting through the chaos. The gun! Victoria spun toward Lily's voice, her expression contorting with rage behind the mask. You little... But Dr. Ramirez had already secured the weapon, handling it with the steady hands of someone who'd grown up with 3 brothers in law enforcement. Don't move, Ms. Blackwood, she ordered, her voice firm despite her watering eyes. The door burst open as hospital security and police officers flooded the room, having been alerted by the power outage and communications failure. Victoria, realizing she was cornered, made a desperate lunge toward Lily. Alexander moved faster than anyone would have expected from a man still recovering from hypothermia. He intercepted Victoria, tackling her to the ground despite the searing pain in his still healing body. As they struggled, Victoria's mask was knocked away, and the disorienting smoke affected her instantly. You don't understand. Victoria gasped as officers pulled her away and secured her wrists with zip ties. The girl can identify me. She saw me that night at the accident. Lily, being guided from the smoke-filled room by Margaret, stopped abruptly. I remember you, she said, her voice small but clear. You were in a black car. You talked to Grandpa Gerald on the phone while looking at our car. You said, "It's done." Victoria's face drained of color as Detective Rivera entered the room, having heard Lily's statement. Victoria Blackwood, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted kidnapping, and assault with a deadly weapon, he announced, nodding to the officers to take her away. As the smoke cleared and medical staff attended to everyone affected, Alexander knelt before Lily, searching her face with concern. Are you all right? Lily nodded solemnly. I didn't use the gun. I knew that would be wrong. You did exactly the right thing, Alexander assured her, overwhelming pride filling his chest. You showed incredible bravery and wisdom. What happens now? Lily asked, the constant refrain of a child whose life had been defined by uncertainty. Alexander smiled gently. Now we go home. 3 months later, spring had transformed Chicago from a frozen landscape to a city in bloom. In Alexander Wellington's sprawling lakeside home, a birthday celebration was underway. Lily's first since being reunited with her uncle. The gathering was small, but significant. Joe from the diner was there, beaming with pride as he presented Lily with a chocolate cake. Ms. Fran from the library had brought a collection of books, each carefully selected to match Lily's emerging interests in science and art. Mr. Chen from the convenience store arrived with his entire family, his wife fussing over Lily as if she were their own grandchild. Dr. Ramirez and Dr. Patterson attended as well, both having become important fixtures in Lily's recovery. Even Detective Rivera had stopped by, bringing a gift and the news that Victoria Blackwood had accepted a plea deal that would keep her in prison for at least 15 years. Margaret Chen, who had taken a leave of absence from her corporate responsibilities to help Alexander establish Lily's new life, was organizing party games in the garden with an efficiency that made everyone smile. As for Gerald Turner, he had survived his heart attack only to face justice. Though his health had spared him from prison, his assets had been frozen, and he remained under house arrest while the legal proceedings continued. The evidence recovered from Victoria's files had exposed decades of financial crimes, unraveling the empire he had built through deception. Lily, dressed in a blue sundress that matched her eyes, blew out the candles on her cake to enthusiastic applause. When Alexander asked what she had wished for, she smiled mysteriously. If I tell you, it won't come true. Later, as the party wound down and guests began to depart, Lily found Alexander standing alone on the terrace, gazing at the lake. She joined him quietly, slipping her hand into his. Thank you for my party, she said. It was the best birthday ever. You're welcome, Starlight, Alexander replied, using the nickname that had evolved naturally between them. You deserve every happiness. Lily considered this for a moment. I've been thinking about Mom and Dad a lot lately, she admitted. The memories aren't so scary anymore. Dr. Patterson says that's progress. It certainly is, Alexander agreed. Your parents would be so proud of you, Lily. I think they'd be proud of you too, Lily offered. For finding me, for not giving up. Alexander felt his throat tighten with emotion. There was never a chance of that. Lily gazed out at the horizon, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. I used to think the worst thing was being alone, she said. But now I understand that the worst thing would be forgetting who I am and where I came from. And who are you, Lily Turner? Alexander asked softly. She smiled up at him, the setting sun illuminating her face with golden light. I'm the girl who survived. I'm my parents' daughter. I'm your niece. Her smile widened. And I'm home. In the months that followed, life settled into new patterns. Lily thrived in school, her natural intelligence blossoming with proper support and encouragement. Her story, carefully protected from media exploitation by Alexander's influence, inspired a foundation dedicated to finding and supporting children who had fallen through the cracks of the system. The Turner Wellington Trust, once the object of Gerald's greed, was restructured under Alexander's guardianship to secure Lily's future, while also funding initiatives to combat child homelessness and improve foster care oversight. On the anniversary of the day Lily had found Alexander unconscious in the snow, they returned to the diner where Joe had helped save his life. As they shared pancakes and hot chocolate, Lily presented Alexander with a small, wrapped package. "What's this?" he asked, surprised. "Open it," Lily urged, practically bouncing with excitement. Inside the box was a framed photograph of Sarah and James Turner, holding baby Lily between them, with Alexander standing proudly beside his sister. The picture had been restored from the damaged original found in Alexander's briefcase that snowy night. "I had it fixed," Lily explained, "so we can remember them properly." Alexander traced the faces in the photograph, his vision blurring with tears. "They're always with us, you know," he said gently. "In you, in your kindness, your courage, your determination. And in you," Lily added wisely, "in how you never stopped looking for me." As they walked home through the city streets that had once been Lily's only home, Alexander watched his niece greeting neighbors by name, pointing out new flowers in window boxes, and chatting about her science project with infectious enthusiasm. The transformation from the wary, silent child he'd first encountered in the hospital to this vibrant, confident girl seemed nothing short of miraculous. Yet it wasn't a miracle, Alexander reflected. It was the natural resilience of a child given love, security, and the freedom to heal. It was the power of connection, overcoming the forces that had tried to sever it. It was family, redefined and reclaimed. "Race you home?" Lily challenged suddenly, already breaking into a run. Alexander laughed and followed, knowing that home was no longer just a place but a feeling they had both found after being lost for too long. And as Lily reached the front gate, turning to wait for him with an impish grin, Alexander silently thanked whatever twist of fate had placed him in that snowstorm on that particular night. Some might call it coincidence. Others might call it destiny. Alexander simply called it finding what had always been meant to